Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Recovery Talk. For this episode, I have a guest with me, and I'm very, very excited about that. So, joining me is Tanya. She is an UX designer at Deloitte, and also she is my best friend. So, I'm very excited to have her join. We are going to talk a bit about social media and apps, and especially with emphasis on MyFitnessPal and how these apps are kind of created to hook people and how that can potentially complicate recovery and complicate the situation for people with eating disorders. We're also going to touch upon ethical design. Does these apps and websites, etc., do they have an ethical responsibility? I hope you guys find this conversation insightful and that you learn something new, and maybe you are a little bit more mindful of how social media and certain apps, how they kind of are designed for you to feel like you have to stay loyal to them and you have to keep using them, right? And then you can kind of make more of an informed decision and take more conscious choices in how you use your phone, your computer, etc. So let's get started. Okay, guys, so I'm here with Tanya. Tanya, are you there? Hi.
Hello.
Hi, so nice to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so I was curious about apps such as MyFitnessPal, and this is an app that is used for a lot of people with eating disorders, and a lot of, especially like when I talk to my clients, a lot of them have a very hard time actually deleting the app and stopping the app to a point where it's almost become a habit to use and check the app. So I was wondering, from your perspective, what are some of the ways that apps such as MyFitnessPal are designed to hook people and just kind of keep people coming back?
Yeah, that's a really good question. With apps like this, you'll find that they integrate rewards within their features. So you'll notice that if you track your food intake for a certain number of days, if you kind of update what you're doing from a sports perspective, so if you're doing cycling, running, and you put that into the app, you'll get a reward of some kind. And this can manifest in like a notification saying thank you or well done for, you did like 7 entries this week, or oh, you hit target of X calories this week or today. Whatever that is, they'll integrate those little rewards and you don't even realize it. But I mean, I imagine you can speak about this from a psychology perspective, but humans love to be rewarded.
Yes.
And that's one of the ways that designers and maybe even businesses integrate things like that.
Yeah. Wow, that is so interesting. And when you said the reward, it was like almost a little bit chilling, because when I talk to people with eating disorders, they often tell me that their eating disorder will kind of reward them in terms of give them a little like kick and high when they, for instance, achieve a specific weight, or they, stay under a specific calorie intake. And now you have an app that is kind of doing what the eating disorder is already doing, that it's also giving those rewards.
Yeah. And what's really like interesting with MyFitnessPal is that it's not intentional to reward the user. If, for example, like you could set a calorie intake level that is maybe lower than what you should be getting, or an exercise level that is maybe higher than what you should be reaching. And they will reward based off of that just because of those are the values that you've put in. So what I'm basically trying to say is that these apps they're not designed with the intention of rewarding bad behaviors or quote unquote bad behaviors. It's mainly just trying to, so for example, if you hit X, we will reward you with a notification or just like a reminder of, okay, you hit this, but it's not designed intentionally to reward marks or goalposts that were hit that was set in an unhealthy manner or with an unhealthy intention behind them, which is really important to remember.
Yes, I think that's so important to remember, right? And I think that it takes us into like a little bit of a difficult subject, right? Because for me personally, just I kind of would say that apps such as MyFitnessPal and just dieting in general and excessively tracking calories, I would say that's not really like a necessary or healthy behavior for anyone, right? But we know that for certain groups, such as people with eating disorder, that can be an absolutely detrimental behavior, right? And I guess, and this takes us into like something that I know me and you discussed a bit, and that is that with ethics, does this app have a responsibility when they know, because realistically, MyFitnessPal, realistically, they have to be aware that a lot of people with eating disorders are using these apps, right? Do they have an ethical responsibility to support their vulnerable users or to kind of weed them out in any way? Can they even do that?
This is a really good question. So, I mean, I feel like it'd be good to kind of define what ethical design is.
Yeah.
And, that's designing products alongside your morals and beliefs, as well as principles of the business. And I think it's really important to highlight the last bit, which is principles of the business, because the morals and ethics of a business will greatly vary and be quite different to the morals and values and beliefs that you hold as a person. So it's about finding that in between, that compromise and that like medium level ground. So with apps like MyFitnessPal, one thing that's really important to remember is that, again, touching back onto how apps like these were created with good intentions. And I was actually listening to another podcast the other day that was talking about how, in order to kind of design more ethically, designers and companies should audit their designs for abusers. So abusers, but then also mixing users with it. It's like a little pun. Just because, for example, like you mentioned, do they have a responsibility? I'm going to lost my train of thought, but yeah, do they have responsibility for those users, the more vulnerable users that could abuse, again, using like quotation marks, the design or the interface or like whatever features there are there. So it's like a very loaded question. We have to like break down into different aspects, because that apps like this are not designed with those features being abused in mind. And it's something that kind of comes up after the app has been released. And it's things that can get picked up in the user research stage, but can very easily get missed within the user research stage. So it's a very like heavy question to try and like unpack and unload. But I'd say like ultimately, going back to like your root question, I would say that yes, now into like today's day and age, like in the modern day, brands and designers have such responsibility to design ethically. I think there's enough resources and there's enough emphasis on user research within the design stage for us to now be aware of the fact that, for example, this feature that I've just designed, I think it's going to be really good, but then also looking into like, okay, how could someone abuse this feature and use this in the way that it's not intended?
I didn't know about what you said with abusers. So this is a thing. And this is something that when, people developing apps and websites, this is something they're aware of and design with that in mind, right?
Yeah, this is something that I'm seeing becoming like increasingly ingrained within the design process. Designing with abusers in mind. And it's essentially auditing your designs with, again, people who could, abuse the design. So for example, with my fitness app, there could be someone who is dieting and is looking to use this app. And that would be what we would call a use case. And then on the other hand, there is another use case that exists that we're seeing now, where it's someone who maybe wants to have a somewhat like unhealthy diet and is looking for this app to maintain that. And that's a separate use case that would have been, we would have liked that to have been identified in the user research stage. So again, it kind of pulls back to like, if you're not familiar with the design, one thing I'm going to really reiterate within this podcast is how important user research is. And it's really important that for your app or for whatever you're designing, you get people who are representative from a realistic standpoint of the audience that you think you'd reach and the audience you think you'd target. So, for example, when I say that an audience that MyFitnessPal would target is dieters, but then an audience MyFitnessPal would reach are kind of like, unhealthy dieters as well.
Yeah, that is so interesting. And I wonder, so I'm thinking like practically with MyFitnessPal, like what could they have done? Because I was thinking, for example, like I have to admit, I have not really opened that app in many years. So I don't really know. I should probably have downloaded it just for research for this episode like you did, but I didn't do that. But as far as I remember back when I was using that app, there wasn't any so for instance, imagine if you set a calorie goal and you set that calorie goal very, very low, or you set a weight goal and that is very, very low weight goal. Shouldn't there then maybe be like a pop-up like, hey, the consequences of doing this, or like some helpline? Not saying that in itself would really make that much of a difference, because people, for instance, with anorexia, other eating disorders, they're very aware that what they're doing is not healthy, right? But at least, I don't know, at least better than nothing.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think like when I was looking through, I did like an example, like a calorie intake level, and I purposely set it to something lower, and they did notify the user like, hey, this actually isn't, not in these words, but they basically was just like, hey, this isn't, what we would
Okay.
recommend given your like height and weight, because obviously you have to put those features, you have to put those details in as well. But on top of that, I do think that it'd be really good to kind of think about ways that apps like this can maybe prevent unhealthy goals being wanting to be reached. I think there's, this is where like design comes in handy, and this is where like a really good UX team shines bright. Because then you would kind of brainstorm, okay, we see users doing this. It's not healthy. How do we get them to still use the app, but then not use it for these needs and these desires? Like, how do we kind of change the goalpost for them in a way that's not intrusive? Because again, you don't want to be intrusive to whoever's in the app. You don't want to offend. And yeah, it's really crazy thinking, like, speaking of an app is like in a really humanistic way, but when you're designing, you kind of have to, you don't want to offend the user. You don't want to hurt the user's feelings. You don't want to make them feel worse. So like, for example, they could just outright like shame the user. Like, why are you setting this, unhealthy target? You should be doing this. And that would be the wrong way to do it. So again, you have to be really intricate and really considerate with how you kind of block or highlight to users what they're doing in a way that keeps them on the app, but then also changes the goalpost for them.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe also clarify that this app is not for everyone, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think so. This is like, again, using like another design term, like what we'd call, or what something that you could kind of iron out in onboarding. And onboarding is essentially like when you first log into an app for the first time and you're using it, and it's that stage of like taking you through like, oh, this app does this, and it's like your first introduction to whatever app. Like, everyone's experienced it. For example, your first sign up on Twitter, your first, sign up on Instagram, everyone's gone through an onboarding. So I do think that like those moments when a user first meets an app is where issues like that and kind of terms and conditions like that can be communicated. Because again, you could probably speak on this from a psychology point of view, but I know that in design, like, it's widely noted that when you first integrate or first kind of meet an app, that is when your interest is at its highest, and then it kind of only drops from there. So that's the perfect point to communicate the terms and conditions, I believe.
Yeah, no, that is so, so important, I think, because a lot of other apps, right? For instance, let's say TikTok, Instagram, they have an age limit, and they are intentionally then excluding minors. They're excluding a group because they know that this app for you may not be healthy, right? And we can't really keep it safe for you, because if you are under, I don't know what the age limit is, do you know?
I assume 13, but I can't know for sure, but I assume 13.
I think it is around there. So essentially they're saying, okay, for this group, this app may not be safe, right? And I wish that there was maybe stronger ways that MyFitnessPal could do that. And also one thing, it was so interesting, what we speak about with rewards. And I wonder if, because you said that the reward bit is something that kind of keeps people coming to the app, right?
Yeah.
That in itself, I'm thinking, if you are someone with an eating disorder and you're used to getting a reward from your phone whenever you log your meals or your weight that's gone down, that is a positive reward. Just from a psychological point of view, that is a positive reward, right? That gives you that little dopamine hit. And then you don't have that. It's just so stuck in my head, that reward bit, right?
Yeah. And it's crazy how it manifests in different ways for different apps. Like, this is something, or a tactic. I don't even want to call it a tactic. We'll say tactic that every single platform or like app that you uses. Like, it's the rewards that keep you there without you even knowing. Like, you might get that notification or see that reward and feel nothing, but from a psychology point of view, it is doing something, and it is part of the reason why you keep on coming back.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And this is, I think, is very subconscious as well. People may not be consciously aware of it, right? And also just one of the things that I absolutely love is, the science of habits, like how habits are programmed in our heads and how much of our life and everyday life goes simply by habit, right?
Mhm.
And that's just also one thinking. These apps, they kind of want you to make them a habit, a daily part of your life, right? To retain users. And then they send these rewards and they keep you hooked. And that's why when I have clients who are fully motivated to recover, but they still have deleting that app feels really like it can be very emotional, very strange. It's so
Oh,
fascinating.
wow. Yeah,
Yeah.
that is so fascinating. Like, what is the emotional connection there, do you think?
I personally, just from a habit point of view, I think a lot of it is habit, but I also think it is
Okay.
safety, predictability, familiarity.
Yeah.
With an eating disorder, a lot of people with eating disorder get used to counting calories, right? And here they have an app where they can count the calories on their phone, and then letting go of that feels like letting go of the control, right? And this can
Wow.
also translate into recovery. So I've had clients that calorie count in recovery to make sure they're getting enough. And that in itself is not necessarily always a bad thing. But the problem is when they're using an app such as MyFitnessPal to count those calories, this app will essentially stop rewarding them because now they're eating a lot, right? And
Yeah.
now they're gaining weight, right? And the app doesn't reward that, even though that is what essentially, as far as I'm aware, it doesn't reward that. I'm not sure if there are settings or anything, but so essentially, when it comes to using MyFitnessPal in recovery, I work with people who are like, yeah, I want to use it just to keep myself accountable, make sure I'm eating enough. But the app in itself is triggering because the app has so many features that are designed more for like a dieter in mind. And then actually deleting the app, even though they know that, especially when they're at a point where, yeah, they know that they probably don't need to count calories anymore, but it's just become a safety net. They're scared of letting go of the calorie counting because it's become such a habit. And they feel like if they let go of that, they're going to lose their whole recovery and start restricting again, right? So this is why I think working with someone in recovery instead of just using like MyFitnessPal, and just because it's very difficult to delete those apps, right? And when I have clients who have the app, like it's like a very special moment when we decide to delete the app. I give them the assignment today, you're going to delete the app. And they're literally like, okay, it's very, yeah, it's crazy. But I also think that a lot of it is just that familiarity thing, like habit, familiarity. But it is just not, I just haven't really seen that app being good for anyone, right? I don't know, but again, this is also my opinion. I'm just don't really like these apps in general, because also these apps, they give you, like, when you write in your like your height and weight, they give you like a suggested calorie amount, and that calorie amount, just from a nutritional biological point of view, is way too low. So it is like medically kind of neglectful as well, that they're giving an intake that is actually too low and is really putting people at risk, right? They tend to give an intake similar to what was actually prescribed in the Minnesota starvation study, which is a literal study on human starvation. And they tend, yeah, so it is that in itself, but that is a whole different conversation about like how people got because there's like how people got it wrong with what is the average calorie intake. That's a whole different topic, a whole different episode.
Okay.
That is another thing, another reason why I have a bit of beef with that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I was kind of disappointed at the lack of kind of education on dieting that was integrated in a way that was effortless for the user. So if you wanted to kind of be educated, like, oh, wait, is this calorie intake, like you said, is this calorie intake suggested actually good for me? Can I read it more about this before I kind of confirm that this is what I want to accept? There's no way for the user to do that. So I think just for what it is, I think it'd be really great if they could integrate a little bit more like education in a way that's, one click away for the user, as opposed to being hidden like in a menu and then like hidden in another tab and another tab and another tab.
Yeah. Yeah, because I guess like from just a purely technological point of view, it's not like a bad app in terms of how it's designed. It's just the way it's being used, even when used in this quote unquote right intentions. Again, just because I think that behavior when dieting has a 95% failure rate, it's like, it's a really like, it's that good promoting something that's doomed to fail, right? But that is a whole different conversation. And another thing that I have been thinking a lot about is, this is more like when it comes to like scrolling and using apps, right? So for instance, TikTok is a good example of this, right? You scroll and there's like an infinite scroll, right? And I learned that this was actually a design function that was invented to keep the users just scrolling for longer. And this I think is this ethical? Like, I don't know. I was just like, oh.
Oh my God, the infinite scroll,
Yeah.
So, I remember I was watching a design show on Netflix and they were interviewing the guy that created the infinite scroll. I can't remember his name now. And he was like, I'm in two parts. Like, I feel like the worst human ever, but I also feel like the best designer ever. And I feel like very fitting. Because on one hand, it's like, it's literally changed the world and it's changed the way that social media apps, navigate and how you kind of integrate and communicate with the social media app. But then on the other hand, it's created like obsession and like an over reliance and just like mass injection of content, which can be viewed as a good and a bad thing. But with the infinite scroll, it's quite interesting because there's like a technical justification for it as well. Like it's just a little bit easier from like a developer point of view to have within a app. But then also, like if you are wanting to keep people hooked and just kind of constantly feed them content, it's also can be used for that. What I find like really interesting is, this is a little bit off topic, but how, for example, like e-commerce sites, so if you wanted to shop online, infinite scroll is not a thing. But then if you want to use TikTok, infinite scroll is a thing. I don't know. I just always thought that was strange.
Why?
Yeah, it's strange. Right?
Wow, that makes you think that, wouldn't that be, oh my God, that's interesting.
But then again, like you could speak about it from a technical perspective, because what e-commerce sites use to like load the products you see is like it's like a lazy load system, which is again getting really technical and like off topic. But yeah, it's very interesting. It's like weird where infinite scroll lives. Like the industries and kind of spaces it lives in is very like just interesting. Yeah.
Wow. No, I find it so fascinating with the whole like infinite scroll, because I noticed for myself. So I have like a very love-hate relationship to TikTok. I tend to avoid the app because I noticed that the infinite scroll, like on Instagram, at least if I'm scrolling too much on Instagram, at least Instagram will tell me you're all caught up. And I'm like, oh my God, I've been spending way too much time on Instagram, and then I go off. But for TikTok, I just scroll and scroll. And also, and I know this is moving a little bit off subject, but I also noticed that, the way it works, if I watch one video about, dogs, then I'll get more dogs, right? But then I'm also thinking, if you are vulnerable, imagine you're an eating disorder recovery. And this I've had with clients where they're on TikTok and then they actually, they are in recovery. They're not looking for like inspiration or anything, but because they naturally are, when they see that video, that will be something that they will stop on, right? Like there'll be a video of someone, for instance, is very thin or doing like what I eat in a day video. And then they will just get more of it, right? And then that will shape their worldview without them realizing and kind of hook them at the app, So it's like, again, I think this goes back to the users and abusers part, right?
Yes. Yeah. Like I think with social media apps in today's day and age, we have to be very careful with what we interact with and what we give like cognitive bandwidth. So if you're on TikTok and you're kind of stopping at the videos that are promoting something that you don't agree with, you have to kind of, it's sad, but like in today's day and age, if you want to like beat the algorithm, you need to like not engage with content like you need to not give it the time of day. That's the only way that you can really escape it, which is again really hard. And like you shouldn't have to navigate a social media app with that kind of mindset. But again, that's just one of the ways that you can kind of like beat it and prevent yourself getting those kind of videos. But it is really sad, like just going on what you said about how some users will go on TikTok to find like, well, not go on TikTok to find this, but they'll find videos that kind of could maybe not damage their recovery, but just kind of go against their recovery.
Yeah.
Because like I'm not like in this space, and like I have seen videos that are very, very like pro Anna. So it's just very weird, like how on apps like that, things like that thrive, but then on Instagram, again, this is outside looking in, it could be completely different for like someone within that space. But like on Instagram, I don't really see content like that.
This is the thing. And I had that experience as well because I went on TikTok because I'm for my Instagram account. I sometimes make some like reels and stuff and I'm thinking, yeah, might as well just post them on TikTok, right? And then I was just looking around because I was looking at the recovery tags, just knowing what tags I'll use to reach more of an audience, right? And I just noticed that the content that came up on TikTok, it was like, and again, it's like a very difficult ethical question because I don't think just because someone is, has a very physically like visible sick body in terms of being very underweight, they have to hide themselves forever, right? But we also know that the reason why those videos get clicks is because there are people who are intrigued, and unfortunately, a lot of these people are, sick people who find that very triggering, seeing someone who's very, very thin, right? And I noticed that on TikTok there was so much of this content with like very dramatic visuals, like people being severely underweight, people with feeding tubes. Whilst on Instagram, if you go in the recovery tags, it's more like infographics, talking about, science tips on how to recover, a lot more safe content. Again, this was my experience, but I did also ask my audience about it. Like, hey guys, is this just me? Am I just being like old or something, not understanding TikTok? And everyone was like, no, it's a thing. I had to delete TikTok. I tend to only stay on Instagram. Not that Instagram is always great either, because there can be a lot of triggering content on Instagram, but TikTok was just, whoa. It was like, is this about recovery? Is it about having an eating disorder, basically?
Yeah, it's crazy. Like one thing I have noticed though is that Instagram's I don't even know what to call it, but whatever they use to kind of filter content is quite good. Like for how big it is, it's really good. Whereas TikTok, I noticed that some content will get filtered out a lot easier than others. So for example, like even if you're like partially nude, when you're filming it, they will come up with a pop-up like, okay, we like detect that this video might not be like child friendly when you're filming it. But then I imagine like for other aspects, like so outside of nudity and outside of maybe like child harm, I feel like maybe those kind of issues are getting deprioritized from a filter perspective. But one thing, yeah, I will say Instagram is very good for how big it is for filtering content.
Yeah, I think Instagram is very good. Sometimes it's a little bit too good because they have shadow banning, and sometimes they will like I use like hashtags on Instagram just to kind of reach more people in recovery, so they hopefully see the content. And with recovery hashtags, there's like sometimes they just ban random hashtags, right? And this wouldn't be pro ana hashtags. This would be like, for instance, like they banned like real recovery hashtag that was shadow banned. So I accidentally used that hashtag and then boom, I was shadow banned. And I noticed that a fraction of my followers saw my latest post. I noticed that my story views went down by like, I had like 1/3 of the story views I had like the day before. So I think Instagram, they're very good, but unfortunately with Instagram, there's an issue also where they end up censoring people. And, they also like, I remember they had like shadow banned the hashtag pansexual. And it's like, wow, you can just shadow ban an entire sexual orientation, right? So I think Instagram, they're very good, but I think sometimes they might be a bit too good. And also now there's this like sensitive content thing where you can turn on and off sensitive content, but that also, really harm, for instance, sex workers that are using the app, to spread awareness about sex work, not necessarily selling sex, but they're using it, just talk about those very important issues. They're being shadow banned, right? So I think Instagram is good in terms of that it is a little bit safer, but it is sometimes a little bit too good. And TikTok, they seem, from what I see, to be a little bit better at detecting like not child friendly, but I'm not sure how good they are with eating disorders. But I saw on Twitter, I should probably delete Twitter because I end up scrolling way too much. But I saw on Twitter, there was someone that said, I just got a job at TikTok as like an advisor for eating disorders or something. So maybe they're trying to make a difference. So that made me really happy. So hopefully something will happen. It's not just, to look good. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I mean, that's also, TikTok as well, like to give it a bit of credit, it's new, relatively new. So again, kind of like with MyFitnessPal, where like these different use cases come up as like the app. So there's things that you just will not kind of see, unfortunately, while building, that you'll only recognize when people start actually using. So again, with that new position coming up on TikTok, I think that's a really good signal of them kind of being proactive about, okay, this is something that we have identified now that the app is out that we missed in user research. But also just kind of going up back to what you were talking about with Instagram being kind of, they're good at it, but they're also almost always too good. It really ties back into like designing for abusers. This is a really perfect example of how difficult it can be. Obviously what Instagram's kind of done there, like those kind of measures that they've put in a really good example of designing for abusers, but then also seeing how intricate and how difficult it can be to kind of make sure that you reach a good balance. So, for example, with the banning of the pansexual hashtag, that is obviously not good, and kind of designing for abusers gone wrong. But yeah, it just really goes to show that it's not an easy thing to do. Like, as designers, we have the hardest jobs, but
Oh
yeah.
my God, yes, I can imagine. It's so difficult because, yeah, wow. And it's so interesting with Instagram, right? Because on one hand, they're very good, but on another hand, I've had huge beef with Instagram, or like one-sided beef because they're ignoring me, obviously, but about the fact that even though I feel like they're pretty good at, when you click a recovery hashtag, there will usually be not as much harmful content as on TikTok, right? But they are very, very bad when it comes to, they're not deleting pro Anna accounts, right? So I've reported several accounts that are literally pro Anna accounts, right? And some of them have even reposted pictures of me when I was at my sickest, not like literally posted my sick pictures as an inspiration for other people to lose weight, right? So I'll report these accounts, and I would say like in like, I don't know, like 80% of the cases, Instagram, when I report them, Instagram is like, we did not remove this account because it didn't go against our guidelines, right? So it's like, maybe they are more hesitant to remove accounts rather than shadow banning. I don't know. They don't want to they don't want to lose users or something. I don't know.
Yeah, it could be like a form of user retention, a very like weird form of user retention. It also could be like there's more, if you lose your account, you're more likely to fight for that. There's just a lot of fallout that you have to deal with when it comes to removing a user's account. And also as well, like coming back to like ethics, like is it ethical to remove someone's account? Like, do people deserve a second chance? Was someone aware of what they were doing? Was someone aware that what they were doing was harmful? There's all of these questions. I do believe that like removing a user should be kind of the last resort. Just because again, it's kind of like, I mean, what power do Instagram have to remove someone's account? Especially if someone didn't know what they were doing was harmful. But again, like obviously if someone is very obviously breaking the rules, like remove their account, and like especially if they've been given warnings and stuff. But it's definitely a big ethics question, like when do you remove a user when the kind of lines are a bit blurry or it's a bit gray.
Yeah, I think that is the thing, right? And I think what was frustrating is because Instagram, they do have specific guidelines, like this is when it goes against our guidelines, right? This is guidelines promoting eating disorders, and then you report someone who very clearly is promoting eating disorders, and then they're like, actually nope. But I do completely understand. And also when it comes to removing content, Instagram has been really like called out for this, where when it comes to like they removed, like for instance, I follow this like lingerie brand, and they suddenly Instagram just taken down their accounts, right? Because they posted women in lingerie, but they won't take down Victoria's Secret's accounts, right? So they like hit smaller businesses, unfortunately. And also like, yeah.
I was just going to say there was actually like an article, when like all of their stuff got leaked, like Facebook stuff got leaked. There was an article that like stated that there are certain accounts that are protected from the rules. And I think it was like, I want to say like around 1 million accounts are protected from Instagram's rules. So they can, get by and do a lot of stuff. So, I assume maybe that had a bit of play in that as well, unfortunately.
Wow. Yeah. I remember there was also this case where there was a plus size model. She was a Black plus size model, and she was posting pictures of herself, and her pictures just kept being taken down. And she noticed that, thin models, and especially white models, that their pictures were not taken down. So she was calling out Instagram for, racism and fat phobia. And this became a case in the UK, and like a bit of a campaign. And then Instagram actually, I think they ended up changing their rules a little bit, or having like a meeting with her. I didn't read into it too much. So I think Instagram, they're trying, but also definitely different treatment for different people, right?
Definitely. And it's really sad how it kind of mimics real life, in that like it's usually like underrepresented and devalued groups that get hit the hardest from these kind of rules, and they're the ones that slip through the cracks the most. It's really annoying, but
yeah, wow, when you say it, yeah, it's literally mimicking the real world, right? I think that's the scary thing with these apps, that they're kind of, whether that's mimicking, discrimination from real world gets taken into the apps, or they're mimicking, your eating disorders, rewarding you for harmful behavior. Now you have an app that's doing it. A lot of these apps are essentially just we say, oh, it's just an app, it's just internet, right? But a lot of it is actually taking those dynamics into, the app or the website, right?
Yeah, literally. Like, I mean, user research, like within the design stage, is like one of the most thorough things that you do when, coming up with an app. So by knowing how big these user research departments are for these big companies, it just really kind of, I look at it with a bit of a side eye. Because when you know what goes into it, like this is like months and months and months of research collated from millions of people in like different use cases. Like it's not like a small scale thing. So when you know that like they research and they know, yeah, like stuff like this still happens, it's just really like disheartening as a designer.
Yes. Yeah, that's the thing, right? Like, why is this still happening? You've done so much research, you spend so much like time and energy being like, oh yeah, we were fighting this. And it's like, yeah, but it's still happening.
Yes.
Wow. Wow. No, this was such an interesting conversation, Tanya. Thank you so much for being on. It was so lovely to hearing just your perspective. And I feel like I learned a lot of things. I mean, I knew some already because, full transparency, guys, me and Tanya are in real life best friends. So I'm literally going to see her like now, right afterwards. We're going to go and eat some sushi. So I know some of these things already, but it was still, I feel like I learned a lot. I did not know about the whole thing with like abusers and how that's something that websites, apps are like aware of and like keep that in mind when they're designing ethically. Wow. I did not know that.
Yes. And like, I've had such a good time on this podcast. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, a pleasure.
Good conversation.
Yeah.
And yes, I've learned so much as well, honestly.
Yeah, that's so good. And I look forward to eating sushi with you in 2 hours.
I cannot wait.
Okay, guys, thank you so much for listening. And I hope you enjoyed this episode. You can follow Tanya on Instagram at Tanya the Designer. And you can also check out her podcast, Design Chit Chat.